Please hold whilst we connect you to Redacted.
This is Lucy Bishop.
And this is Fraser Greenfield.
This is Tom Hardy. And you're listening to
Today, we're welcoming a returning guest, a giant, if you will, Tom Hardy. Previously, we spoke to Tom about his 22-year-long career at IBM, where he started as a grad, designing the first IBM PC, and finished his tenure as IBM's corporate design program director. Whether it's in an 80s documentary or a period drama like *Halt and Catch Fire*, a favorite here at Redacted, Tom's work has had a profound effect on the world. If you'd like to listen to that, be sure to check out episode 14, Dangerously Curious, with Tom Hardy. In this episode, however, we're sitting down with Tom and diving into his role in helping a little-known company in Korea become one of today's design juggernauts. That company is Samsung. Plus, a whole lot more. So to recap, who is Tom Hardy in 100 words or less?
Not the actor. Actually, that's my Instagram ID, Tom Hardy, not the actor. I have some interesting stories about that's happened.
You've been mistaken?
I was in New York City and a client put me in the Standard Hotel, which is a nice boutique hotel over on the West Village. And it's a place where celebrities would stay. So I go down to check out. I give them my name, and these two young ladies, they looked disappointed. And then they recovered. I said, sorry, but we saw Tom Hardy in the system, and we thought the actor was staying here. And so then they said, but we're so glad you came. But for a few moments there, they were definitely disappointed that it wasn't who they thought it was.
Well, you're a celebrity to us, Tom.
Oh, jeez. Okay.
I'm sure you've got a lot more interesting things to say on industrial design than the other Tom Hardy. I think we'd be disappointed if the actor turned up.
Maybe I'll meet him one day. Who knows?
As a design celebrity, how would you summarize your impact on industrial design?
I'm in my 54th year now in this business. I've been really fortunate. I've had a lot of wonderful opportunities, met some great people. I don't think I'll probably ever really retire. I use the word rewire myself, not retire. And so I've done that a few times. I started out as an industrial designer with IBM, and I was with that company for a good while, over 2 decades, and I retired and started my own consulting business, which I've been doing now for about 32 years. Now I'm also teaching graduate school at Savannah College of Art and Design. I look at academia as basically the third act in the play of life. It's quite nice. I particularly like graduate students. They actually ask questions and answer questions, and they want to be there. It's fulfilling, particularly when they go out in the world and then they succeed and they're having a great life. And you get a nice note reflecting on their education. So it's wonderful to contribute to helping folks like that.
It feels like the world is rapidly changing, even since the last episode. What have you been up to since we last spoke, and what new challenges have you surpassed since then? Any cool new projects?
The academic world has really taken over most of my life now because, as I mentioned, I really enjoy it. And so I scale back my consulting business quite a lot. I think that when the right opportunities come along, then I will probably shift gears a little bit and reprioritize my time. But I've done some consulting business while I've been teaching, and the school was very good at handling that as long as I could have someone cover my classes. For example, I had a project in Istanbul, and I had to go to Turkey a week at a time for about 3 different trips during school. We have a 10-week quarter, so that was taking 3 weeks out of a 10-week quarter, which is, if you teach 4 classes, that's the number of classes you're going to have to miss. But the school, they like for their faculty to be involved in real-world stuff. It's good for everybody. You build up case studies that you can use with the students so you can teach that part of the project that you've been working on, for example. I have a rule. I pay whoever's covering class for me. We always cover for each other. If somebody gets sick and somebody has to come in and cover a class for them, that's one thing. But if I'm going away on a consulting trip and I'm getting paid, then I feel like it's only fair if I pay the person who's covering my class for me.
Do you find those consulting jobs really help you stay grounded in your academic sense? You don't get lost in the theory?
Yeah, I think it's really healthy to do that. Not only do you get a break, a physical and a mental break away from the routine that you get into, but you get away from the theory aspect of it because you're applying it, of course. That's why the school, SCAD in particular, where I work, believes that it's important. I don't know how many other schools would let faculty take that period of time away. I'm sure that some do, but I'm sure there's some that don't as well, or they discourage it. But SCAD really encourages you to do that.
Hey everyone, this episode is sponsored by PCBWay, the go-to destination for printed circuit board prototyping, low-volume production, and PCB assembly. If your team are working on electronics and you're in need of prototype PCBs, I can't recommend PCBWay enough. You can get a quote instantly, even if your circuit board schematics aren't finished yet. They can also help you with injection molded, 3D printed, sheet metal, and vacuum cast prototypes. PCBWay is the circuit board prototyper of choice for companies like Samsung, Siemens, Honeywell, Tesla, and Apple. But you don't have to be a big company to use their services. I've personally used their service to instantly get quotes and have assembled prototype PCBs delivered in a timely manner. On top of all that, PCBWay is so excited to be working with us. They're offering a special discount just for our listeners. When you get a quote from PCBWay, be sure to use our promo code REDACTED for a special discount on us. You can find PCBWay in our episode description or go to pcbway.com.
Last we spoke, you'd accepted an early retirement from IBM, and then a little later, Samsung tapped you on the shoulder. How did that happen exactly?
I had planned to do 30 years at IBM. Because in 30 years, you get a full retirement. The pension, back then, they had pensions for the rest of your life, right? And health benefits paid and all that. But in the early 90s, IBM got into some financial downturn. There were some changes going on. And so there was a program that they offered, and I was reading it because I had to give it to my employees at a meeting. And I thought, my gosh, I qualify for this. And basically what it was, if you had 22 years in 1992 and you wanted to retire, they would give you an 8-year bridge to 30, which meant you could retire at 22 years, but you get a 30-year pension. Your pension is based on 30 years of work rather than 22, which means it's more money. And then you also got a 1-year lump sum of your salary. I was 46 years old, and I thought, I could do this again. And it was voluntary. And they were basically offering it to people who had higher salaries. I guess part of their business model that they'd figured out is if you've been got the 22-year number that they had was obviously based on the number of people they thought would take it. And it was such a financial no-brainer that I think 3 times the amount of people took it that they thought were going to take it. And like I said, it wasn't mandatory. So some people just said, no, I don't think I'm going to do it. I'll stay here. But I actually had a difficult time making the decision because I'd worked with that company since I got out of college. It was a great experience and a great company. And I thought, if I walk away from this, am I crazy? There are people that would kill for that job because at that point I was directing the corporate program, coordinating 15 design students around the world and working with preeminent designers like Paul Rand and Richard Sapper and just having a great time. I couldn't make up my mind. And so I took a trip by myself down in the Blue Ridge Mountains up in Virginia and North Carolina to make a decision. And I decided if I don't do it now, I'd probably regret it. So then what happened was that I started my independent consulting business. I didn't want to have a staff. I wanted to do it by myself. I mean, I could collaborate with other folks or bring people in to collaborate with me, but I didn't want to start a consulting business with a staff and a big office and all that. I've been there, done that at IBM when we had 450,000 people in 160 countries. So when you're working at a scale like that, that was one of the reasons that I decided to do what I did. I had been doing my own thing for about 3 years. And I got contacted by Samsung. It was 1996. They wanted me to come over and give a presentation to some Samsung executives who were at a retreat south of Seoul at a Samsung facility. The day they wanted me to come, I had stuff going on the day before and the day after, but I wasn't going to turn it down because of that. I made a presentation. Basically, they were checking me out.
Do you suspect that at the time, or were you just like, oh, coming to do a quick chat?
The people that asked me to come over there, they let me know that there was a consultancy that they wanted to talk to me about. So I knew what the purpose was. I was really interested in that because I had learned about the new chairman of Samsung, who was the son of the founder. When he got into that position, he wanted to transform that company to a global company with its own brand identity. And innovation was going to be part of their image. Before that, Samsung was known for copying Sony and making the products cheaper. They had no fundamental brand direction, brand strategy. Designers had no power. The big gorillas on campus, if you would, were marketing and manufacturing. Because marketing told the designers, here's the product we want you to copy at Sony. And then manufacturing knew how to make it cheaper. When Chairman Lee took the job, he wrote a manifesto. And among the other things that he said in there was that all employees have to change everything except their spouse and their children.
Everyone comes with new haircuts.
I'm sure that some folks may have said, excuse me, sir, I've been thinking about changing my spouse. Could I do that? But at any rate, it was a tops-down culture. And so when the CEO said something like that, they did it. Had it not been that type of corporate culture, it would have never happened the way that it did because it was such a huge transformation that had to take place. You had to have people marching to the same values.
I just can't even comprehend such a big ship turning like that and just having everyone on board. It's incredible.
That's what made that project so incredible. I mean, that's the best consulting project I've ever done. My work lasted 7 years.
And for reference, is this the Lee you speak of, Lee Kun-hee?
Yes.
Not his less than savory son, Lee Jae-yong.
I think I went to Korea close to 30 times over that 7-year period. A lot of kimchi.
A kimchi connoisseur.
And a lot of makgeolli, which is a mountain rice wine that I came to like as well. But that's another story. It was a wonderful project, and they brought different people in over time. My work was with Samsung Electronics, which was the part of the company that made consumer products. Samsung was a huge organization. They made, and they still make, computer chips. They also made ships, SHIPS, large ships, super tankers, freighters, and all that. They got into the car business for a while. Samsung had a car.
Oh, one up on Apple there then, with Apple recently cancelling their car.
They canceled their electric car, yeah. The Shabu, which is the Korean
Aristocracy.
Yes. If one has an automobile like Hyundai or Kia, then Samsung had to get one. So it was this one-upsmanship type of thing that I observed in that culture. They decided to get out of it after a few years, but they built a factory and all this. They put a lot of money into it. The strategy was to bring certain consultants in for different aspects of the business. So they brought in a brand advertising group from New York, Arnell Group, to start changing the advertising image of the company. Now, we didn't have all the products to a point when they were brought in because there were a lot of the old stuff in the pipeline. It took about 2, maybe 3 years for all the new stuff to start getting out into the world. But Arnell Group did some really innovative advertising ideas using the simplest and the best products that they could find. Consumer products had never been advertised like that before. Peter Arnell, who is the head of that company, he was a photographer, did a lot of fashion photography. They developed the DKNY for Donna Karan and a lot of other fashion work that he did. It wasn't all they did, but they did a good bit of that. There was fashion, a black and white photography. Some of it was a little sensual in a sense. And then they made these wonderful print ads. They had banners hanging up in Times Square and the Ginza in Tokyo and Piccadilly in London. One of the most famous ones was the Microwave Man.
I love this. We're going to make microwaves sexy
It was this young guy with great abs holding a microwave oven.
with a microwave dinner.
It wasn't like a normal ad. There was a lot of white space, great design, but you had this guy in great shape holding a microwave, and that gets your attention and say, wow, why is this guy holding a microwave? Then you see the little logo Samsung. Oh, well, this is interesting. This is an innovative way to do this. They had quite a number of concepts like that to first grab people's attention, and then, oh, by the way, it's connected to Samsung. Rather than Samsung logo slapping you across the head, it was brilliant. One of the really great ones was a television spot about a Samsung television. It opened up, there was a picture of a guy and then a woman, and these two women were talking. You didn't see them, you just heard the voice and these images. It was sensual, but you had no idea what kind of commercial this was. There was no indication in the beginning of it. This woman says, "Are you watching?" And the other lady said, "Yes." And the other one said, "Do you like it?" She said, "Yes, I love it. My Samsung TV." And then the camera went right to the logo and then stopped. I mean, it was just absolutely wonderful.
Amazing.
What was Samsung back then trying to achieve from a design perspective? Did they have a grand plan on where you fitted in, or were you just there to help iron that part out?
Their strategy was to build their brand globally. They wanted to build a brand that had an innovative image with innovative products. In order to do that, it required an infrastructure within the company managing design, having a brand ethos which guides the designers to developing innovative products that are going to reflect this new image that the company wanted. Even though the CEO was driving this, in the system of management and the infrastructure, you still had to do what I call evangelizing, which is convincing people that design adds value. It was interesting that Chairman Lee had insight into that, which is why they started bringing advisors over to help drive that, because his daughter, from what I understood, she lived in the apartments above the Museum of Modern Art in New York. She was exposed to design, and I'm sure she was talking to him about, if you're going to do this big transformation, design needs to be a part of it. He also had a good friend, his name was Tommy Otaki. He wasn't a designer, but he owned Anne Klein, and then he bought Donna Karan. So he was a fashion businessman, but he knew the value of design. Since he was a personal friend of Chairman Lee, he was talking to him about that as well. And so they convinced him that design had to be part of the business strategy. Whereas the chairman had the sense of that, you still had to work within the company through management to have a buy-in, to understand design is much more than just hanging the curtains at the end of an interior design project or picking a color. It's strategic, it's human-centric, it makes products that are compelling, and people want to buy them, and they're comfortable with using them, and so forth. That was a big part of building this infrastructure. The other thing Samsung did, which was a great idea, was they had a design school. They built a design school. It was across the river in Seoul, separate building from the Samsung Electronics designers and engineers.
Was this there before you got there, or a recent development?
It was put in there, I think, in 95, the year before I got there. There were two people from a former art center, Gordon Bruce, who was a friend of mine, and Jim Miho, who was a notable graphic designer. They were brought in to create the school. So they actually moved to Seoul temporarily for about 3 years, full time. They set up a school with the concept that they would take select designers out of the business for a year, maybe about 20 designers, and run them through this school where they taught them some new methodologies, new computer-aided design tools that they hadn't seen before. But a wonderful thing that they did, which I think was game-changing for them, Gordon and Miho took these folks around the world to study different cultures. They didn't have to work while they were traveling around the world. They went all over Europe, different countries in Asia, all around the United States, and soaked up world culture. I was there long enough to see some of these young designers who left, stayed a year in that school, traveled around the world. They were changed people when they came back. They were trying to get them out of Seoul, basically, and say, there's more to the world. We're going to be doing global products. You need to understand the values of other cultures because that's where the products are going to go. And they were trying to get them from being just Seoul-centric, if you would. It cost Samsung a lot of money to do that.
I was going to say, what an incredible gift to give somebody.
It was a brilliant move to create that school. I was trying to figure out how to hook up myself into some of those trips, but I was never able to pull that off.
This is Tom Hardy, and you're listening to Redacted.
One of the first things that had to be done was creating a brand ethos, because you had to have brand guidance for the designers to have a direction. And then weaving within that, you had to have metrics associated with that, the metrics that reflected the brand strategy. I was concerned, frankly, when I had to do that a Westerner coming into that culture saying, well, here's what your brand ethos needs to be. I had independently been actually studying the Yi Jing, which is the ancient Chinese philosophy of the Tao, which is the yin-yang system. And I became really fascinated with that. The Chinese philosophers that did that thousands of years ago really got it right, because the philosophy was about harmony and about what you normally would think were opposites were actually complementary. For example, without light, there is no shadow. If you think of the yin-yang symbol of the Tao, it's got the black and white in a circle with a curve in the middle, and there's a white dot in the black and a black dot in the white. That means that there's a little bit of the yin and the yang and a little bit of the yang and the yin, and the curve is harmony, complements, working together. And they created 64 permutations of taking the yin-yang, let's say in a hexagram, which is 6 elements, 6 combinations of yin and yang, and depending on how much yin or how much yang you had in, that configuration had a meaning to it. These are the universal meanings. I looked at that and thought, this is the same thing as designing a product or graphic design or creating a film or writing a story, because you're putting together different elements in a way that's creating a meaning.
How did you take that philosophy and implement it into working at Samsung?
It was interesting because the Korean flag has a symbol, which is a circle, and it's got the Tao curve in the center. It doesn't have the 2 dots, and it's red and blue. And it's called Taeguk, not the Tao. And instead of yin and yang, I think it's yang and but it's still the same philosophy of complementary, not opposites. And so I figured these folks have grown up with this. It's part of their being, their culture. They understand this. So I decided to translate that into a brand ethos statement, which was a balance of reason and feeling. The idea was that every Samsung product, every Samsung graphic design, advertisement, speech that an executive would say, whatever they were doing that represented the brand had to have both reason and feeling. Some things, depending on the context, had to have more reason and less feeling. Some had to have much more feeling and emotion than reason, but it had to have both. So then I developed a methodology that talked about how you measure when to apply more reason, more feeling, depending on the context of what it is. And then I started running workshops on that.
Do you have any examples of how a product development was impacted by that?
As part of this infrastructure, I noticed that they were organized in product development in categories of technology. There were appliance designers, there were AV designers, there were telephone designers. They were all in these silos. They didn't necessarily work together, And again, this was also when they were copying Sony. I decided that it would be best if they were organized in terms of context of how these products and services are used. So I recommended that they change their organization into 3 entities, which would be home, mobile, and office. Then I created a Venn diagram where all 3 of those overlapped because the mobile, for example, telephone, cell phone, it had to be higher on the emotional side because it was a personal object that people had with them, accessory.
Incredible that you had an insight that people would use their mobile phones as an extension of themselves even then.
And then for office, the products had to be a little more structured, had to be more systems oriented. And in the home, it had to be a mix. They had to have some emotion because, again, that's part of your personal expression in your own house. You had to have emotion. And in the home, you also had to have the rational side of it, the reason side, because in the kitchen, let's say, there are certain dimensional constraints where refrigerators and stoves and dishwashers have to fit in a certain modular system within buildings. But they also have to have emotion because they're in your personal home environment. And the office is higher on the rational side, the reason side, but it also still has to have some emotion, not as much as in the home and far less than in a phone because the phone is so personal. But it's a workplace that people have to feel good about. And so that was the strategy of how that philosophy would be implemented across the company. And then that's how management would measure it. So those also turned into metrics. So when somebody was getting evaluated, like on an annual basis, right, in their job, what kind of work they did. And I created these guidelines of how to evaluate the designers. This whole level of work that I was involved in got into that level of detail because you had to do that. You just couldn't have some overriding pie in the sky type of theme that you're going to say, okay, here's what you're going to do. You're going to do this, and then just walk away from it.
Yeah, you need to commit as much as you're expecting them to commit.
That was part of the infrastructure of making sure that the brand essence, if you would, was conveyed properly in context of the consumer environment where the consumers would use these things. When you've got a large company like that and a lot of designers, you have to make sure that they understand how to apply this rational and emotional balance. And so you need to measure them on that. The management would do that. And if they weren't doing the right thing, then they're not going to get promoted or they're not going to get as much of a raise. And so over time, that starts to reinforce the application of the philosophy in the proper way.
What were some of the challenges of transitioning the organization into this more design-focused philosophy back then?
In the beginning, there were still a lot of folks from marketing and manufacturing that were in positions of power and some authority. And so building the infrastructure didn't happen overnight, but thank goodness that the chairman wrote this manifesto and basically everybody had to change everything except their spouse and their children, as he said. And so those people that were in the previous administration, if you would, when they were copying Sony, making it cheaper, they eventually left or they converted. I think that took probably a couple of years. Filter out all the old guys, if you would.
That sounds like it happened pretty quickly, though. When you've met people who won't change.
Well, it did.
We have a few of those down here, right?
Many.
Had it not been tops down, it wouldn't have happened like that. And then it's quick.
And it sounds like it was a real consistent messaging.
Yes, it was. And everybody eventually bought into it. The brand equity of Samsung in 1996 was around $6 billion. In 2003, they passed Sony in sales for the first time ever, and their brand equity value was $17 billion over that 7-year period.
Pretty incredible.
When the word got out to the media what Samsung was doing and products started showing up and the advertising was helping change the image, Business Week wrote a number of articles about this. And one, the headline was, "What's happening at Samsung?" was people started noticing this with advertising and products design and so forth. And there was a headline that I'll never forget. It said, Samsung is no longer a fallback for those who can't afford a Sony. And when I saw that, I thought I did my job. I couldn't have written a better headline myself.
Yeah, you couldn't have paid them to make something better. Yeah, incredible.
And see, the nice thing about that coming in a business magazine was that the executives, the management, Samsung, they don't read design magazines typically. They read business publications.
It's like someone has been able to quantify it. Someone outside the circle finally gets it.
Exactly. In fact, it was interesting. Part of this move toward different levels of getting design on track and adding value to the company. As I mentioned, it took a while for the products to get through the pipeline in an organization to start coming out. I suggested to the design director who came in and was part of this whole effort that they should enter every design competition in the world, in Europe, all over the United States, and Asia, with concept ideas. See, there's usually a category in these design competitions of advanced design. They're not real products because Samsung didn't have a lot of real products then that had gotten to that point yet. It was a point in time. We were doing everything we could to start building the brand, like the advertising campaigns that I mentioned earlier. By design doing that, they didn't have to ask permission, you see, from a product manager somewhere. They could just do it themselves. And so they started winning awards, and that was written about in Business Week.
How long did it take till you started consistently winning awards? Were there a lot of failures that no one remembers?
It was about 3 years. See, they started winning awards not with real products that were released for production, because that was all still in the pipeline.
A different pipeline.
Right. They were getting awards on these advanced products. One even made the cover of Business Week. And on the screen, the title of that issue was World's Best Products or Hottest Products or something like that. Because there was a featured article inside that issue that had advanced designs from different companies all over the world, and Samsung was one of them. But this product they made for a kid's television, this yellow, really interesting design, made it to the cover. Now, that had never happened before, anything from Samsung. And there were actually a couple of products that won awards, advanced ideas. And there were some product directors in Samsung that came into the design director's office and said, "What are these products? We've never seen these things before." And so he told them, yeah, these were advanced ideas that our designers were doing, looking ahead, and they were in the category for this award program and blah, blah, blah. They made it into real products because the design directors got inspired by the fact that it showed up in a business magazine.
The ultimate social proof.
That was what was so exciting about that project. There were big things like that.
Were there any crushing failures that you experienced while you were there?
I think in the beginning, where there were still some folks that were part of the old regime that had a hard time getting new ideas through. They were still trying to maintain their power. I think they were trying to play along with the CEO's strategy, of course, because if they didn't, they were probably going to get kicked out.
It's an interesting tightrope they walk, isn't it? Agreeing with the innovation and then pushing against.
Yeah, exactly. There were some things that failed and didn't get through the system that should have, but eventually that all got cleaned up. It was a fascinating experience.
So how did you overcome those dinosaurs, if you will, who didn't want to change?
I was an outside advisor, so we had to rely on the design director to do that. He was also obviously part of the Korean culture, and he was in a management position. The middle management is where these issues occurred because the senior executives were following the CEO's strategy and they had bought into it. But it was like any company. My experience in working for corporations and consulting for different companies, so the middle management can be the real problem sometimes because they're walking a tightrope sometimes. One of the other elements in the infrastructure that I recommended that they do is create an executive design council that would be composed of the head of Samsung Design, which was head of the business unit of Samsung Electronics, reporting to the CEO of Samsung. and key executives from marketing and other key technology executives. The idea was they would meet every quarter with the director of design on maybe a 2 or 3 hour meeting and talk about what's happening with design and the brand and the company and so forth. I modeled that after one we had at IBM. We had IBM Design Council. We met every quarter. The CEO was on that council and all of his direct reports that ran the lines of business and the head of technology. And the way that we got those folks together for a meeting, because they were around the world, was that they all had to make a presentation to the IBM board. And they had to come to corporate headquarters for that. The CEO's staff, we were writing the agenda for all these guys coming in, put the design council meeting on the agenda, so they had to show up. Design director, which at my time in that position, I had to basically decide what topic we wanted to present. And we could bring up an issue. If something was happening in one of the lines of businesses where the local design centers were having a difficult time with engineering or some other problem that could be adversely affecting the brand, the corporate design program had the right to bring that up to senior management. Because these design center managers, they wore two hats. One was they reported to the local business unit that they were in, but they also had a dotted line, if you would, close to being a solid line between the location that they reported to and the corporate design program. By corporate policy, we represented the brand. We reported to corporate communications at the corporate level. The vice president of communications, who reported to the IBM CEO, had design. So that was like my key executive in the C-suite. And they put the design program, they meaning the original group that formed the design program at IBM in 1956, which is Elliott Noyes, brought in by Tom Watson Jr., which is interesting. He was the son of the founder of IBM, similar dynamic to Chairman Lee, Samsung. When Tom Watson Jr. took over reins at IBM, he made design part of his legacy. He thought that IBM was developing this advanced technology, but their image of their products, the architecture of their buildings, their marketing communications and advertising did not match the advanced technology. That stuff looked old. He brought in Elliott Noyes, who he had known in the Pentagon during World War II. They were both pilots. And it turns out that Elliott had no idea that Watson's father was the founder of IBM. Fast forward after the war, Watson takes over from his father. Elliott's actually opened up an industrial design office and an architecture office in Connecticut. And he had a project working on an electric typewriter for IBM through another firm in Chicago.
The Selectric?
No, it was before that. It was IBM's first electric typewriter, but not the Selectric. The way the story goes, Watson came in to look at this machine, and there was his old friend Elliott Noyes. And he said, I know you. You taught me to fly a glider. What happened was, when Watson decided to make design part of his strategy, he asked Elliott to be a consultant and help him do that. Noyes came in, and Noyes brought in Paul Raines, the other two major consultants, to transform IBM's image.
And then the same dynamic occurred at Samsung with James Miho, yourself, and Gordon Bruce.
And of course, there was Peter Arnell doing the advertising. They decided that design had to represent the brand because that gave it power. In other words, product managers throughout the company that were responsible for getting a product out the door, if they wanted to put an IBM logo on that product, it had to meet design criteria. It represented the brand. It was like franchising. That's how we looked at it. If they wanted to put their own name on a product and they wanted to put all their personal money into the product and try to sell it around the world, and go at it. Nobody did that. So if they wanted to put IBM on it, well, now it had to be a certain character, da. So all this was put into corporate policy. The design program was corporate policy, which meant all the other organizations throughout the world at IBM, they might try to do something, go around somebody and screw it up, but they didn't have the authority. We could stop stuff.
Had the big no button.
Special, yeah.
But of course, IBM was a very large company. And I think it was like, I don't know, 450,000 people in around 160 countries when I was there. So with that scale, you're going to have folks that don't necessarily get the message. And again, it's mostly middle management. When you fill the sky with airplanes and go in and try to put out a fire or stop something that shouldn't be happening, then you could go in and argue with people far above your pay grade. They didn't have the authority by corporate policy to represent the brand with their personal opinion.
I love that.
That was a brilliant thing that they did when they set these rules up. They had the job description of not only the director of design, but design center managers, industrial designers, graphic designers, what their responsibility was, how it was tied to the brand, and that was key.
With that experience in mind, were you part of how they set up that same policy, those brand guidelines at Samsung as well?
Yes. Yeah, that was part of my job.
What key takeaways did you get from the IBM experience that you didn't replicate at Samsung, and why?
They were large, but they weren't as large as IBM. When I started, they had a design center in Seoul and a new one that they had just put up in Tokyo. So you didn't have the same global coordination dynamics because it was more centralized. That made it easier, frankly. Eventually, they put a design center in place in London and San Francisco. So they had 4, but it still wasn't as large as IBM. We covered a lot of ground. This strategy had to have these different elements and different tiers from the ethos, which is the first thing to do, get the brand positioning. Then you had to build the infrastructure to get the resources in and the management system in to do that. And then you had the internal education with the school that had to get done. All this stuff is going in parallel. Then you got advertising, sales promotion, and then the advanced design stuff going through the media, building the brand. It couldn't happen in sequence. It was parallel stuff that had to go on.
Exciting. Maybe to rephrase, if you had to redo, let's say, the first 3 years of that job at Samsung, what would you have done differently?
Eaten more kimchi.
Yeah, that or more makgeolli. I wish I'd have tried the rice wine earlier, probably.
Did you have any key takeaways on Korean working culture? What did they do right? What did they do wrong?
They work extremely hard, very hard workers. I found them to be great collaborators. They got on a mission and they make it happen and they push it beyond the norm. My experience with them was they just don't try to get something to a certain point and then that's the end of the job. They keep pushing it. I don't think that company could have done what it did and continues to do what it did without having that type of hardworking, driving culture. Now, you run the risk of burning people out like that. I'm not sure that happens some, but they were dedicated. That was my experience with them. It made all the 28-hour round trips and all that worth it.
This is Tom Hardy, and you're listening to Redacted.
If you were asked to replicate the same work you did at Samsung at a different organization, what would your cliff notes be? What would be the 60-second debrief you'd give someone?
Clearly understand what the problem is. Get a succinct problem statement. What are the factors in the company that would prevent one from solving the problem in a unique way? When you find out those elements, then you deconstruct all that, and that's what you use to build a plan to address a strategy of how to fix it.
What would be the main metrics to track the success of your plan?
If it met the brand strategy of the organization, it would have to convey that. It would need to be consumer, human-centric. And if innovation was part of the corporate strategy, then it would have to be unique. The most important out of those is to make sure that whatever you're doing represents the strategy of the company.
And if it doesn't?
And don't do it. So you have to start over.
Redacted.
So, given all your experience, Tom, what would you say has been your greatest failure and what did you learn from it?
I think when I was a young manager, maybe in the first management job that I had, because I designed products for 10 years as an industrial designer before I was offered a management position, sold my soul to management, if you would. I think I may have not escalated, meaning take it up the chain, a couple of issues rather than trying to compromise politically on something, rather than pushing it through the system, even if I ran the risk of alienating higher level management at the organization level that I was dealing with. There's some things where you just have to keep going with it, regardless of what the politics are. I think there's a couple of things that I should have pushed harder for.
I think it's so interesting that you talk about politics because it's something that I never heard about going to uni, and then you're thrust in the professional workplace and it's full of politics and learning how to navigate it and knowing when to die on the hill, knowing when not to die on the hill.
Oh, yeah. Some of that you learn just through winning and losing,
Yeah, absolutely.
through experience. That's the only way you can really learn that. I'm really very thankful that I worked in a huge company like that because the scale of politics was incredible.
So you could lose one week and win the next instead of just consistently have the same person in charge.
And people moved around a lot, you see. What you find in particularly in large organizations are people on the fast track. They've been identified as having good qualities, good leadership qualities. So they're put on the track to move up really fast through the organization to different positions where they can get a lot of varied experience. And those kind of people have become senior executives in companies. But the dynamics of all that, people in those positions, once you would get them trained, if you would, in terms of the value of design, and they're gone. They go somewhere else.
It's a gift though, right? Because they're taking the value of design up higher to interact with more people.
That's the positive thing about it. It comes with the territory of working in a big company like that, because then you've got to go in and educate somebody else again. But if you're successful in doing that, then it does build a network. But sometimes it slows things down. If things are really moving fast and you have to go through and start over again,
Yeah, I can imagine it being very frustrating.
that's just part of the territory and you learn to accept it.
How do you get marked as a fast track person?
You get marked if you're politically astute. You just don't go in and try to win everything yourself just by being argumentative. You understand how to handle different situations diplomatically, but you also know when to throw the gauntlet down, if you would, but in a way that's professional. And you show leadership qualities that you can lead other people and that they look to you as a leader. You've got those qualities of being confident and you're thinking about other people, not just yourself. Those are the characteristics, I think, of people that are on a fast track and can multitask. Of course, that's a big one. Be able to do different things and not get rattled, just do it and get it done.
Stay stoic.
To the veterans out there, what do you think that needs to be said that's been left unsaid?
To veterans,
Mm.
don't give up.
I love it.
When it comes to big organizations, what do you think is going to come up as trending or will change significantly in the next 10 years?
I think AI is going to have a big influence on that. It's not unlike other major things that have happened in history. Look what happened when automobiles came in. Horses, they lost their job.
Such an interesting parallel to bring because they both bring this very unique type of freedom to go where you want. But then on the other hand, AI is almost freedom of these additional mundane tasks you may not need to be doing in the future.
There's some interesting things that happened when the automobiles came in. Not only did it provide much more efficient transportation for people, it also gave women independence from men.
I'm not so sure. To me, I feel like it's mostly just going to be automation. And then we also have to remember that horses were still widely used all the way up until the late 40s. Horses in Europe, for example, were extremely common and extremely well used and were not replaced by cars until after World War II because there was a shortage of horses.
That comparison is probably not the best one to use because you're right about that. On some fundamental levels, it was a big change. AI will surely replace some jobs, but I think the people that are going to survive it are the people that are going to know how to use AI. The thing is to understand it now, how it can help you do your work or do things in your life rather than trying to fight it. Fundamentally, it's computing. It's just that this level of computing technology now can do things a lot faster. It can crunch through a tremendous amount of data, and it can be creative to a point, and that's going to keep changing.
Are there any wish lists you have for what automation and AI can do? For me, I really want AI to do CAD. I don't necessarily want it to do mid-journey ideas.
Helping solve wicked problems. Wicked problems are defined as problems that really don't have a solution because they're fundamentally complex adaptive systems. AI will help us with complex adaptive systems. Now, a virus, for example, is a complex adaptive system. When a virus hits, like COVID, and then there's a vaccine developed, that will reduce the problem of its successful vaccine.
But then you get some of those different thinking mutations that get around it in that new way.
That's right. So the virus figures out a way to get around the vaccine to a certain degree. A complex adaptive system is on the edge of chaos, but you can harness that and figure out how to use it. I think AI is going to help solve some wicked problems.
That's such an interesting take because I don't know if you know much about quantum computers. I don't. But it sounds a very similar situation where it's almost trying to solve those complex problems as well and that chaos.
Quantum computing and AI, they're together. It's going to help in that regard because the wicked problems have a lot of agents, a lot of factors involved in it, and they're extremely complex. And a lot of the agents are also adaptive. The ability for the AI to go in and help assess all that and analyze it, it's recognizing patterns, it's recognizing hierarchies and all this. I think it's going to significantly improve some difficult problems that we've got. Hopefully, I think in healthcare, it's going to hopefully be a great thing.
What are some of your favorite achievements or projects that are lesser known that you're pretty fond of?
Well, I had a great project in Thailand,
Ooh,
which was working in the northern part of Thailand near Chiang Mai. It's up in the mountains. And there was a consulting firm in New York that brought me in to do projects periodically. They did great projects. Whenever I would see the phone number come up,
you get excited?
oh, yeah, I know it's going to be an adventure because I've had projects with those guys in Istanbul, Saudi Arabia. It's been fantastic. So the call was, can you spend a month in Thailand? Well, yeah, heck yes. It was doing research, understanding what's the essence of Thai. In other words, Thai food, Thai craft, Thai dance, fashion, handicraft. What makes it Thai? For example, with food, what makes Thai food different from Indian food and Chinese food? They're neighbors, if you would. And it had to do with building this definition, if you would, of Thai. It was going to ultimately affect the economic development in northern Thailand because there were going to be some products designed with the Thai elements by this other organization, but they were all going to be made in Thailand. So it was going to build up the economic development in northern Thailand. It's a very meaningful project. Thailand was unbelievable. It's called the Land of Smiles. The people were great. We only took like a day off in a month. There were different people doing different things. We would go out doing all this research in these wonderful places. That was one of my favorite projects.
Isn't that the best feeling when you're working on something and you're so excited for the end of the day so you can go to bed and you can wake up and start again? I've only had it a few times ever, and it's honestly just the best.
That was one of the great ones.
Tom, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us a unique insight into a very special chapter of design history. For those of you who want to listen to our previous episode with Tom, where we dive in to design at IBM and Tom's experience designing the first ever personal computer, check out our 14th episode, Dangerously Curious with Tom Hardy. Don't forget to check the show notes for links to anything we've mentioned and the discounts from our sponsors. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, this has been Redacted with
Tom Hardy.
The number you have dialed has not been recognized. Please check and try again. The number you have dialed has been